Welcome to Don't Quote Me on That. One day we will have an intro, but today is not that day.
Hello, I'm Kalina, and welcome back to Don't Quote Me on That, where we kind of talk about movies. Once again, Kalina, me, is alone, and we all know what that means. When I'm alone, I get to do whatever I want and commandeer the show. And one time, Eleanor, for those of you who aren't familiar, Eleanor is my co-host who's usually here every week for the show. Eleanor and I once had a discussion about what qualified as media and what sorts of things we could talk about. We agreed that even though they're kind of like the, for lack of a better phrase, original form, that books didn't qualify as media for the purposes of our discussions. However, I love books. I read a lot of books. Eleanor's not here to stop me, so we will be talking about books today. I did tie it back into the media theme, at least for the show, in terms of what the premise is. So let me explain the premise because I'm getting ahead of myself here. My goal this year was to read 25 books. And then I talked to my mom and I was like, oh, and she thought that was cool. So she was like, okay, what if, I read 25, you read 25, we'll read 50 together. I would like to just let everyone know, I'm sorry for airing her business out here. It's May. My mother has not read one book. I have read, I think 17 at this point. But basically, I'm doing all the heavy lifting. And then, a couple months in, it was clear. My mom was like, yeah, I still haven't even started a book, let alone finished one. So I asked Eleanor, I was like, you want to hop in on this? Because, if you read one book and my mom reads one book, then I only have to read 48 books instead of 50 or 49. And Eleanor was like, sure. And I'll let everyone take a guess as to how many books Eleanor read. Hint, it's the same number as my mother. But anyway, I think I'm 17 books into my 25 for the year. So if I hit 25 before, July starts, I'll aim for 50. But if not, I'll just double whatever number I'm at then. But I keep track of what books I've read, obviously, and when I finish them. So I thought it'd be fun to pick a favorite book from each month. Now, obviously, it's early May, so I didn't do May, I only did January to April, and assigned it a song that I thought summed up the book, so to speak, or that I would associate with the book for some reason. So we're just gonna hop right into this. It's just me, so it'll be a short. I always say that, and then I talk for way longer than I think I can, but it should be a short episode, all things considered. In January, I have my notes here. I read 5 books, and my favorite of them all was Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin. I thought that was a really good book, and before I read it, all I had seen about it was really good reviews. It was one of those books I picked up and could not put back down. I'd go to work, I'd go to work and be thinking about the book, So it's really good. The premise of Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow is basically these two friends who fall in and out of each other's lives, but the constant throughout their lives, what they bond over and what they end up doing together as a career is they make video games. And I thought it had some really great moments, and if you're a fan of the show, you've heard me say this before, that I don't think, at least in terms of music, I don't find love songs interesting as a narrative, and that kind of translates over to books as well, in the sense that I don't read romance books. I don't mind if there's romance in my book, but I never really sit down and read just a pure romance. To me, that's just not compelling. And I think, just as a whole in society, but especially in media and depictions of relationships, that platonic relationships are always pushed to the side. And I think a platonic relationship or relationships are just as important, if not more important or more meaningful, I guess, in your life than romantic relationships. And I feel a lot of times they get kind of sidelined for romantic relationships when friendships can be 10 times more interesting. I'm a big found family, that sort of thing. I like those. So this is about a friendship. They never fall in love. I think one of my favorite quotes in the book it's about the two main characters are Sam and Sadie. Sam at one point says he more than loved Sadie Green. There needed to be another word for it. And that to me is kind of the crux of the book is they have this deep unending love, and people always ask them, oh, are you two date? Especially once they started making games and going on press tours for their games and stuff that they made. You know, are you two dating? Like, what's your relationship like? And no one understood that they could be just friends but have such a long-lasting, powerful bond that pushed them both to be better people and more creative people and just improve them in a way, but without ever being romantic. They were human. They had fights. They didn't agree on things. There's like a big plot where she doesn't talk to him. Sadie doesn't talk to Sam for months. Also, I'm going to try and do this episode without spoiling the books for you, but I'll let you know if I do. So that is a bit of a spoiler, but like not also. But she doesn't talk to him for a while, and kind of like how they fall back to each other's lives after that happens. And this description's getting too long. I think friendship is important. Anyway, the song I went with for Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow is actually technically a love song, funnily enough. But I think, you know, themes cross over. But it's I Can't Tell You Why by the Eagles. I'm sure if you've listened to the show before, you're not at all shocked that I picked an Eagles song. I'm surprised it was the first off the bat. But the reason I picked I Can't Tell You Why is the crux of this song is every time I try and walk away, something makes me turn around and stay, and I can't tell you why. And like I said, in the book, they fall in and out of each other's lives, but also there's moments where one of them will recognize in some scenario, it'd be so much easier if I just left now, but because they're friends and they love each other and they feel responsible for each other. In some examples are that, you know, they are trying to be the bigger person or whatever happened. Sometimes, you know, let's like you get a fight with your friend and it's easier to walk away. It's so much easier to say, whatever, I'm done with this. But they keep coming back. Or like Sam sometimes puts his foot in his mouth, but Sadie is the one person in his life he is willing to try and move past that for, or like is more likely to recognize that he's done that in order to move past it for or work on it for. And another line I really liked in this song, we make it harder than it has to be. And I think that's just a good depiction of relationships as a whole, really, is sometimes I think you get so caught up on like what the other person could do or want or say, and you overcomplicate things. And I think especially in the early years of Sadie and Sam's friendship in the book, there's a lot of missteps because they're overthinking things and they are projecting or however you want to play it, but like they don't know each other as well. Even like as time goes on, obviously they realize that like even if we're not talking for a couple months, we're going to end up back in each other's lives because that's what just happens. That just is what happens to them. But like imagine the first couple times that happens, they're like, I'm never speaking to you again, and that's it, they're done. So like they're overcomplicating things and like making things seem like the end of the world when they shouldn't be. And then also there's a great character, my favorite character in the book is named Marks, who's a mutual friend of Sadie and Sam, and kind of you see how he comes in and like provides this nice balance to their relationship without ever like getting into it, if that makes sense. Like at the end of the day, it is always about Sam and Sadie and their relationship, but Marks is a persistent character but not a intrusive one, if that makes sense. So Marks kind of, I think, represents when Sam and Sadie make things harder than they have to be, Marks comes in and tells them, yo, you're making this harder than it needs to be, and simplifies it for them or helps them solve it or whatever they need in that space at that time. So all of that said, I cannot recommend that book enough. I think it's a wonderful book. There's so many quotes from it I could just wax poetic on. And again, the more than love. And don't get me wrong, romantic relationships are important and they can be deeper than things. But I think because of the status romantic relationships get and the assumption, I suppose, that like that should be the most important, that should be the prevalent, other relationships fall by the wayside and because they fall by the wayside and they're not treated as important when they feel as deep and as moving as a romantic relationship should. I just think it's a very beautiful thing. Also, I really want to get a physical copy of this book because it's like holographic. So I heard somewhere that if you have 1,000 books, it counts as a library. So that's my current, or like next time I'm like settled at home for a while, that's what I'm working towards. But anyway, all that said, we'll move to the next month. So that was January. Tomorrow. I read 5 books. The next month, it was February. I only read 2 books, and I didn't like either of them. I read Love is a Dog from Hell by Charles Bukowski because I'm trying to read, like, quote-unquote classics or, well-known authors, stuff like that. And I also like to switch up the type of book I read. So, like, I'll never read 2 biographies back-to-back, or I'll never read 2 thrillers back-to-back, whatever. So I don't know what that book was about, okay? I do not know what was going on. The best line in that book is the title, Love is a Dog from Hell. And, like, I understand why Bukowski is important, but, like, I don't know. I'm sure there's someone out there who likes Bukowski who's gonna be like, women can't take hearing men talk about women in whatever way. And, like, you know what? You're right. And, like, I get why it's important. I just, for my own personal tastes in poetry, that's not what I want to read and digest. Anyway, and then I read The Chalk Man by C.J. Tudor in February, which wasn't a bad book. It was a mystery suspense, but it just, like, was kind of a book. You know what I mean? Like, I'd give it a 3. So we'll move on to March, and I'll cheat a little bit since I didn't have one for February. And in March, let's see here, I read 4 books, so I picked back up the pace again. I read Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad, and then I read If We Were Villains by M.L. Rio. And I'm sure anyone who is in a book space online has heard of If We Were Villains. It's kind of like in the same vein as, like, that dark academia, The Secret History by Donna Tartt sort of vibe. But I read If We Were Villains first because it had been on my to-be-read list long before The Secret History. And I loved it. I absolutely adored it. Just a little spoiler. We'll skip ahead a little bit. In April, I ended up reading The Secret History. That was the first book I read in April. And I liked If We Were Villains more. A bit controversial, I know, because I know The Secret History, like, pioneered that. But one, I think because I had heard so much about The Secret History, kind of going into it, it was like I had too many expectations. 2, it was way longer. And 3, I'm more of a Shakespeare girly, unfortunately, than a Greek classics girly. So I just think If We Were Villains spoke to me more. And the song I picked for that is All Things End by Hosier, which is off of his new little, I think it was a 3-song EP. Also, I heard he's releasing a new version of Eat Your Young, and I'm very excited for that. It's like a chorus kind of version, so I'm very excited to hear that. But anyway, All Things End, Hosier. The reason I picked this for If We Were Villains by M.L. Rio is, in one line he says, "We didn't get it right, but love, we did our best." And I tried to pick songs that represented the book as a whole, not just necessarily a specific relationship or the ending of the book, especially in the case of this book. If you know the ending, you know that last line, insane. And I have a lot of feelings about it. I'm not sure if they're all good. But yeah, we didn't get it right, but we did our best. So kind of, I should probably give you the plot of the book, shouldn't I, if you haven't read it. According to Wikipedia, the plot is, If We Were Villains is a story of a tightly knit group of 7 lyric-mad Shakespearean thespians who seem to prefer each other's company to anyone else's, thereby offending the rest of the world. But as these things so often go, something dark and sinister soon sows hatred in them and wedges its way between them. And I'm sorry, that's the Goodreads plot summary. We get everything from the main character's point of view. His name's Oliver, and Oliver has one relationship amongst all of the group of 7 that's, like, more important or more profound than the rest of the friendships and the relationships in the book. But All Things End to me had parallels for both, like, Oliver himself, Oliver in the one specific relationship, and then Oliver in, like, the group as a whole of Shakespearean actors. For me, We Didn't Get It Right, but Love, We Did Our Best was the one person specifically. Again, if you've read the book, you know. But there is a deception. I don't want to say misunderstanding. Deception that occurs, and to me, I think him saying, we did our best is there's not everyone's happy with the reason for the deception or the deception taking place, and Oliver's like, listen, this is the best case scenario. Even though we didn't get it right, like, this is the best we can do. And then also he says, all that we intend is scrawled in sand. And kind of there's some moments in the book that I really like that aren't necessarily about the plot and more about, I'm sure everyone has been in college experienced this, but I'm sure for art students, it's especially actors and stuff like that, it's very difficult. Like, you know, you're in your drama class and you have these big dreams of being on the stage or being in films or being on TV or, you know, something like that. These, not delusions of grandeur, but this idea of what your life will be like as a successful actor, which is obviously something that it's much easier to say you want to do than do. So all that we intend is scrawled in the sand is like, even if the what happened in this book, this dark act that took place in this book didn't occur, as you approach graduation, for example, or as these 7 actors approach graduation, it's like all these plans that we had are just filtering through our hands as easily as sand. And that's what he says. In all things, and he says, all that we intend is built on sand. It slips right through our hands. And just knowing that everything will end won't change our plans when we begin again. And the book is told in like 2 timelines. So you've got Oliver in the present telling the story, so we'll flash back to what he's telling. So I think there's points in the book where he does say, like, you know, knowing now how it would have ended and what it would have put me through, I stand by what I did. You know, I still would have done it. I can't imagine it going another way. And kind of also because they're Shakespearean actors, I guess kind of the idea of a tragedy that, like, no matter what you do, it's going to end. Which actually makes me think of The Secret History in a way, because I know I said I wasn't a Greek girly, but I'm sure everyone's heard of Hadestown, or the myth of Orpheus and Eurydice, which the musical Hadestown, which originally was a concept album. So media making the link there. What the musical Hadestown is about is the myth of Orpheus and Eurydice, but I like how the musical does it, because in the musical they say to know how it ends and still begin to sing it again. And the way the show ends and begins is has a very nice connection. I'm trying not to spoil things. Has a very nice connection. So like, no matter how many times we tell this story, it'll never end differently, but we love telling the story, and every time, even though you know in your heart of hearts it'll be the same, you watch it again, or you listen to it again, or you tell yourself the story again, hoping for a change. But like, even knowing if you can't change it, you'll still relive it. Yada yada yada. Back to If We Were Villains and All Things End. And then, you know, very simply, that everything will end. There's a big event. Life as they know it, life as Oliver knows it, changes. It has to. So all things end. And one line that I really liked also, or the last line that stuck out to me that connected it to If We Were Villains, is, I know we want this to go easy by being somebody's fault. And I think initially when the main plot device, main climax, whatever you want to call it, occurs, it's very easy to want to point fingers and point blame and say, oh, this is how we got to this point, and it's not really me, like it was a myriad of things. But at the end of the day, like, you have to take responsibility for your actions. And anyway, that was the second book I read in March. Since I didn't have a book for February, I'll cheat again and pick another book for March, which is Everything I Never Told You by Celeste. I want to say NG. I don't think that's correct, so I apologize. But that was I read that after If We Were Villains, and I remember this time, so I will read you the plot summary now. Okay, I'm going to Goodreads again for this one, and it is Lydia is dead, but they don't know this yet. So begins this exquisite novel about a Chinese-American family living in 1970s small-town Ohio. Lydia is the favorite child of Marilyn and James Lee, and her parents are determined that she will fulfill the dreams they were unable to pursue. But when Lydia's body is found in the local lake, the delicate balancing act that has been keeping the Lee family together is destroyed, tumbling them into chaos. I think that's like the little blurb on the back of the book, actually, if I remember correctly. But I got that off of Goodreads, if it's not. So, Everything I Never Told You, very good. I love when a book starts with, like, the thing that you think would be the big secret or the big, reveal. So, starting out with Lydia is dead, but they don't know this yet. It's like, oh, we know something they don't. And, like, if that's the book description, like, what more is in store in this book for us in this book? So, I really like this book. I really liked how it wasn't what I thought it would be. I was expecting, maybe a bit more of like a mystery thriller sort of vibe. But it was very much like a character study and a look at like a mixed race household, which I thought was very interesting and had some really nice interests. The song I picked for Everything I Never Told You is If I Die Young by the band Perry, which I know just by the name sounds a little on the nose because, the book's about a 16-year-old dead girl. But as I listened to the song more and more, it like became clear it had to be this, because If I Die Young, one, I'm pretty sure the band Perry, I'm pretty sure the band Perry is a girl and her two brothers. You can correct me if I'm wrong. The only thing I know about the band Perry, like for a fact, is they sing the song If I Die Young because I really like this song. So I'm pretty sure it's her and her brothers. And in this book, you have Marilyn and James Lee, her parents, Lydia's parents, but you also have her brother and a younger sister. So I just thought the sibling connection was there. But he says in If I Die Young, they say, sink me in the river. And this is a little bit of a spoiler, so I'll pause for a moment. But in the book, Lydia, as we know, is dead and she's found in a lake. So I just thought sink me in, once I heard sink me in the river, that really cemented the choosing of this song for me. And also I like that the ending of the book to me and kind of the circumstances surrounding Lydia's death, to me, I've seen different theories after reading the book, but to me were ambiguous. It wasn't really clear. It was ambiguous. I'll leave it at that. I don't want to get too much into it. And to me, If I Die Young in the song it's never really clear how the narrator of the song dies. Was she murdered? Was it like a natural death? Did she kill herself? But we just know she has died young. So I kind of like that, the connection of the ambiguity between the song and the book. And then also in the song, she says, life ain't always what you think it ought to be. And the reason I really like this for Everything I Never Told You is, like I said, it's a character study. And we get a lot of stuff about Marilyn and James Lee, her parents. And Marilyn is a white American lady. And James is American, but he's descended from Chinese immigrants. So they both put expectations on Lydia as their first daughter. And also in the descriptions, you notice that Lydia's I don't want to say whitest, but she is I guess for lack of a better, whitest or least Chinese looking out of the three children. And so Marilyn and James, her parents, pin their hopes on her. One being the first girl, but two, looking the whitest, and for a variety of reasons. They pin their hopes on her, but their hopes for her are different and their expectations for her are different. And you kind of see how the identity they have constructed for her versus the identity she actually has versus the identity her parent or her siblings see or they get at school and things like that, and all the things that Lydia does to maintain all of these separate identities, none of which are truly hers. So life ain't always what you think it ought to be. I think when Lydia dies and they find this out, Marilyn and everyone is, but specifically Marilyn and James, her parents, are forced to confront what they thought their daughter's life would be and how that impacted the life they actually gave her, if that makes sense. And then also never known the loving of a man, kind of like a little throwaway line, but we kind of learn more about Lydia and the social life she had. And what I never did is done. So again, all these things, all these expectations, these lives that were put on her that she never got to fulfill. But, there's a question of what she would have fulfilled had she lived. And then also, maybe then you'll hear the words I've been saying. Funny when you're dead, how people start listening is one of the last few lines in the song. And in Everything I Never Told You, again, there's a real Lydia. There's a Lydia who was a person who wanted things and had desires and dreams and hopes. And so kind of as we go throughout the story and we get all these little character studies on the different people in her lives and how they're dealing with the aftermath of her death, but also kind of how they got to the point, you know, like, for example, Marilyn and James, how they were like, what their lives were like when they were younger and how they met and, like, the obstacles they overcame to get married and things like that. What was my point? Oh, yes. Funny how you're dead when people start listening. So, like, they realize all these things. Now that Lydia's passed away, it's like, here's the Lydia that existed, and they are just now meeting her. And unfortunately, it took her dying for her parents and her siblings and the people, but specifically her parents and her siblings, to, like, realize who Lydia really was. Not just this person they had constructed in their minds. Although I will say, her siblings are much less guilty of this. There was, like, I think there was some separation between Lydia and her siblings, but because of the veneer, I want to say, that Marilyn and James put on Lydia. Yes. Anyway, very good book. I highly recommend, even if it's not, like, the typical genre you read. I guess it would be called literary fiction. Even if it's not, like, typically what you read. I thought it was absolutely fantastic. It's a quick enough read. Definitely up there on my favorite books for this year. So anyway, that's what I read in March. And then the last book I read in March was The Nickel Boys by Colson Whitehead, which I also thoroughly enjoyed. It's based on this real reform school in Florida, and just kind of, like, the horrors the kids endured and what life was like and kind of the aftermath of that years later. So I thought it was very good for, like, in terms of, like, history. I'm from Florida, so I had it on my to be read for ages. But I finally, like, I thought that was something I, like, needed to sit down and really fully process and absorb. So I finally did that. Would recommend that, but I just couldn't come up with a song that I felt did it justice. So anyway, last month was April. I read 5 books in April. The last 2 were the first and second book in a series. Like I said, I talked about the first book I read in April was The Secret History. Then I read Normal People by Sally Rooney. Same thing. I liked that book. But I feel like enough people have made playlists and, like, song choices for that, so I don't feel like I could contribute anything worthwhile to that. But I really enjoyed that. I read The Forest of Stolen Girls by June Her, and I read, last 2 books were Legendborn and Bloodmarked, both by Tracy Dion, which are in the Legendborn cycle, I believe is what the name of the series is. Very good. I went with Bloodmarked for this one, which is the second, so I will be very careful not to spoil anything, because there's still a 3rd book to come out, and I think everyone should read this book. I saw it everywhere. I am not someone who seeks out books with characters of color, like main characters of color. I don't particularly care. At least I thought I didn't until I read this. But, you know, I see a lot of people talk about, and I for those of you who don't know, I'm a not character, but a person of color. And I see a lot of, like, readers of color talk about how, like, it was very hard reading growing up because no one ever looked like you. And, like, while I agree that's difficult, it never personally felt alienating to me. After reading the Legendborn cycle, I feel more, I don't want to say seen. Seen's not quite the right word, but I feel more seen than before, but I didn't necessarily feel unseen before, if that makes sense. But, like, I just don't want to. You just read the Legendborn cycle, okay? It is, like, a little bit younger. It's a YA fantasy. I don't want to compare it to Percy Jackson because I'm sure it gets compared to that all the time. But in terms of, like, world building and, like, what the kind of fantasy we're working with is, it's like Percy Jackson except with the King Arthur legends. Which also I was reading, like, reviews after, and apparently a lot of people don't know the King Arthur legends, and I thought that was, like, fairly common knowledge. But anyway, I definitely think it's worth it. It's fantastic. I think it's well fleshed out in terms of background characters and culture and all of those things, all these little things that, like, I don't know, I didn't realize I was missing till I had it, if that makes sense. I know a lot of readers, like, realize it's missing, and I honestly think they're far more intelligent than I am and aware than I am. But after reading this, no, I do realize what I was missing, so I'm very grateful for Miss Dion for writing. Anyway, I'm waxing poetic about the wrong thing. The song I picked for Bloodmarked, like I said, I went with the second one just because I like the second one better. So the song I picked for that was Monster by Paramore, which was in the Transformers soundtrack. And honestly, I almost went Decode by Paramore, which was in Twilight, so I don't know if that's better or worse. But anyway, for me, the gist of the song is like revenge against someone, or in the case of Bloodmarked, a system that presented itself as the good guys. And we've had very interesting discussions about like different ways you present good guys, because sometimes you present a good guy in the sense that every action they do is good, even if it's like objectively morally wrong. Because they're the good guy, the action now becomes good, and I don't agree with that. Or you have a good guy who always picks the morally correct, objectively correct option, no matter what it ends up doing, or like how it's perceived, even if it's perceived as the harder decision or the worst decision, because it's objectively morally good, they go with it. And I prefer that, because you need to be good. You can't just be like, oh, because you're good, this decision's good. Because let's say they want a mass murder, that's not good, right? Anyway, getting off topic here. Monster, revenge against the system, or someone presenting themselves as the benefactor. So that's kind of like the overall theme of the song, and to me, the overall theme of the book. And then in the song, she says, come back, we're going to come back for the hope that you've stolen. And same thing, the main character in the Legendborn cycle is named Bree, and Bree is but simultaneously the representation, and in the eyes of one group, also the downfall of this centuries old institution, for lack of a better word. And so she's coming back for the hope that you stole, in the sense that like she's heralding in the new era, and if you don't want to be a part of it, you better get out her way. I'm trying very hard not to spoil things, but if you've read it, I hope you're with me. I hope we're on the same brainwave here. And then she says, I'll stop the whole world from turning into a monster, in the song. And to me, that there's a good chunk of the book is Bree with a core group of friends working on their mission, so to speak. And so, but since Bree's like the big kahuna, so to speak, she's kind of between them and everyone who's trying to stop them, obviously. She's the first line and also the last line of defense, but also she's like the queen on a chessboard, the most important piece. But like also you want to protect your queen. She's the queen and the king on the chessboard, actually, if you think about it. But anyway, she's like standing between her friends and those who are helping her and those who want to stop them. And then finally, she says, I'm not the villain, despite what you're always preaching. And to me, that just summed up Bree in this book. That just summed up Bree in this book beautifully, because the institution that they're working against is controlling the narrative, and the narrative very quickly changes, or like starts out small, let's say to discredit Bree, and very bit by bit slowly chips away at who Bree is, at least in the public eye. But Bree, we know, her friends know, the important people know, that's not actually the case. So, I'm not the villain, despite what you're always preaching, is actually and Bree doesn't say this, but like, I'm the hero in the story. And all I can say is please go read the Legendborn cycle. It's so good. I always talk for like way longer than I think I can. But anyway, I've been Kalina. If you guys like this, I will do another one. Like I said, I'm trying to read 25 books this year, probably more. I'm reading Dracula right now, so if you have any book recommendations, please let me know. If you have any playlist recommendations to go with your books, please let me know. If you have any song recommendations for the books I mentioned here, let me know. And I will talk to you next week. Eleanor should be back. Yeah, you can follow us on Instagram and TikTok at Don't Quote Us on That, and you can follow us on Twitter at Don't Quote Us 27. We're very funny on all of those. It's also, all of those are great places to get in contact with us. So yeah, just check in, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for listening. Don't quote me on that. One day we'll have an outro, but it's not today.